Hello, everyone. I wanted to briefly discuss the linear and the transactional communication models in your textbook. So, with the linear view, the book explains to you how this was based on how radios work. So, this is when this was first developed, but it was a first look at components that go into the communication process and how it works. So, you can see we have the sender, who's the person creating a message. And then that person takes thoughts that are in their mind, right? Thoughts, and they put them into symbols. Words are symbols, and nonverbal behaviors are symbols as well, especially certain types of gestures. And so the sender takes the thoughts, encodes or puts those into symbols and gestures. And then once that message is completed, right, they need to send that message through a channel. And we're going to talk a lot more about channels, but channels, the medium or the vehicle through which the message passes. So we'll come back to that idea. So you also then, once you have that, you send that through the channel, the message through the channel to the receiver. And then the receiver who gets the message decodes it, decodes those symbols, trying to make sense of the message while also dealing with noise, which is anything that distracts from a message. Anything that distracts from a message, that's noise. So this looks pretty good, except for a few other things that affect communication while it's in process. So you're certainly going to do more than just be a sender and receiver. One thing that we learn in this chapter is that if you're in the presence of another person, you cannot not communicate. If you're in the presence of another person, even if you don't intend to communicate anything, you are still communicating. You are still being perceived. Your behavior is being perceived, even if you don't say a word. Your nonverbal, such as your body posture, the way that you walk, your facial expressions, right? We're still interpreting all of those things. So that's one of the things that's different. So we realize that there's not just a sender and a receiver. We're going to see that there's more, because this is kind of like this person's frozen in time, and you're just saying the sender is doing all this work over here and then sending that like a baseball right over here, and the person catches it. And so there's quite a few things missing here, because that is not everything that is going on. So we want to go to the transactional model. And this is the one that we want to use. This is the one that expands that linear model. So several different ways that we'll quickly look at, and that's important and encompasses much more of what affects the communication process. So one of the things you want to look at is, you can see right here that they're no longer you've got an environment, and you've got an environment on this side. So they're using communicator A and communicator B. They've changed that to communicator. Why? Because a communicator is not merely sending a message or simply receiving a message. They're actually doing both simultaneously. So this communication, again, if you're in the presence of another person, it's constant, right? Going back and forth, no matter what. So, and we'll talk a lot more about this throughout the semester. So, you also will see this, back to the environment. You have communicator A and communicator B's environment. What is the environment? The environment used to be called, and they do mention this here, is the each speaker's field of experience, each communicator's field of experience. It certainly, we include physical environment, and we'll get into that some with nonverbal communication, but mostly what we're talking about here is how everything about who we are, everything we've experienced, right? How we've been raised, where we've lived, how we've worked, where we went to school, who our friends are, how you are, how to use social media. I mean, anything, any institutions you belong to, your belief system, and so on. Everything that's part of your experience up to the particular present is your environment as a communicator. So that affects, right, how we perceive messages, the way we put messages together into symbols, right? And how we give feedback and receive feedback, and all of these things are affected by that environment. So each communicator has an environment. You will also see where those two fields of experience or environments overlap. Where they overlap, that's representative of what these two communicators have in common. It's much easier to understand one another if we have common experiences. If they're not exactly the same, of course, but the closer they are, the easier it is to communicate with each other, especially if anything that's affected by those experiences. So it's easier to empathize with people where we have that in common. It may be easier also in some ways to develop relationships and maintain them because of those common areas of field of experience that become a foundation for a relationship. All right. So we also want to look at something else. They still have channels. Okay. Channels are extremely important, and we'll talk more about channels as well in chapter 2. But we also want to look at the fact that channels, and they have a great example in here about, let's see if we can find it here, where I think it's further down. Yeah, no, it's down here. Okay, so about telling someone that you love them, right? And thinking about different channels. So if you say I love you in person, and actually if you say I love you in person in, let's say, a classroom at the school versus I love you at a romantic restaurant, that's also part of the channel that changes dramatically. So it also can be uh, again over the phone, is as a text message. You could do it over social media, right? You could do it in an email. You could do it, as they say, with writing space on a billboard. I can give you more as a voicemail. But what are some other ways? You could purchase a card that someone else has written that says it, or you could hand make a card, and just those differences changes the channel somewhat, and it changes how the message is perceived. Right. So that's what you want to start thinking about, how much that channel makes a difference. Right. So let's go back up here to the model. Okay. And so we want to talk next about noise, because that's something that was expanded. The other one talks about noise in an external sense, such as sounds, especially sounds that could disrupt a message, but it can be other things. When we talk about external noise, we want to make sure we include anything that has to do with the senses. So if someone's in a classroom, and I've had this happen before, if someone's in a classroom, comes to class, interpersonal class, we'll say, and they bring in lunch with them, and it smells really good, and there's a bunch of people in there, let's say it's a 12:30 class, who have not had lunch, you have produced external noise with the scent of some good smelling food, right? So you can see lawnmowers outside of a classroom. I've had that quite a bit too. So that's external noise. So any of those things, right, can be external. Those are things outside of the speaker or the communicator. All right. So the things outside, using any of the senses. It could be something visual. Let's say somebody, I don't know, just a normal everyday class day, wore a prom gown to class, and you'd say, okay, that's weird, right? And it's going to get your attention and distract you from what I might be saying to the class. So, right. So it can be using any of your senses. So I want you to kind of expand it beyond just the sound. All right. Even if the classroom is cold, or if it's too hot, that's also external noise. All right. So then you can have internal noise. And internal noise can be either physiological or psychological. So if the classroom is cold, and thereby then some people feel cold, not everybody feels the same way. Somebody else, I love it 50 degrees outside and sunny. So, and that feels perfect to me rather than 70. So it's about what that person feels internally, so they perceive internally that they are cold. right? And somebody else may perceive that they are hot. So in the same temperature setting. So physiological could be hunger. It could be, again, so if we go back to the example of the student that brings in lunch, you smell that, that's external noise, but then it might produce some stomach growling, right? So that would be internal noise, physiological noise. So that's one type, and also psychological noise. And psychological noise is going to be anything to really that is any kind of thoughts that distract you from the message, any kind of thoughts that distract you from the message. It could be, and I think they give an example of someone having a bad grade on an exam, and that certainly can produce quite a bit of noise. It's hard to know when to give exams back in a physical classroom, because if you give them back before class starts, people can be distracted by the noise of the grade if it's not something that they're happy with. Or if you give it to them at the end, they're distracted because they're wondering what they made. So that's noise. That's a psychological kind of noise. So it could be something you're looking forward to, something that happened that morning, some kind of ongoing conflict that you're dealing with, anything, any kind of thought distraction. Okay, it doesn't really matter, positive or negative, can be noise that interferes with that message. All right, so I just wanted to go over some of those things, right? And they give great examples in here. So let me know if you have any questions or thoughts. Always know that I'm around and can send a message or an email, etc. All right, thank you.